Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode here on the YouTube channel. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. Joining me is a guest that many of you, if you are veterans from season 1 of the Wandering Scribe that first appeared on Anchor, you may remember this guest. Now, for those that are new to the channel, my guest today is author of Artemis of the Dodecantheon Saga, a book that has featured the gods and goddesses of Greek mythology and was also made their first debut on Anchor many years ago. Joining us for their first video appearance on the channel is my good friend, Alleyn Winchester. Jaden, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me back. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a long time, listeners. For those that don't know, when I started this podcast around 2 years ago, Jaden was one of my original guests that I had along with Kim. They were some of my very first people that I had. They were my Inkitt family, my Inkitt crew. And it's so, yeah. Shout out to Kim. Awesome. Amazing guest. Make sure to check out her episodes here as well. And it's just been awesome. Now, for those that have been following my friend Jaden on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, they are the author of the Artemis of the Dodecantheon Saga. And it's probably one of my original favorite books when I began this podcast. And with that, let's just jump right into saying, Jaden, what's new? What's happening?
Oh my God. So much took off in the last year, I think. Because the book that my wife and I had originally wanted to debut with, we happened to come into some money and I was able to publish it January of last year. And that one is Nature Calls Spring, which so I've got 2 books now.
Nice.
Yeah, so I've got my Greek epic, the Dodecantheon Saga, but I also have, my modern fairy tale, Nature Calls. So it's so polarizing. Everybody's like, what the heck are these 2 books? And I'm like, honestly, these stories just come to me and they're both triad sagas. So I was just happy that some of my oldest works were being published. I was 16 when I came up with these books, and they'll be turning 20 this year. Artemis.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Artemis, Nature Calls, and Eclipse, which is still on Inkitt. All of those were born in the same year, and I was kind of flushing them all out. And so it's my heart is melting because I'm like, oh my God, 2 of the original 3 are in print. Of course, they're just the first installments, which I'm sure you picked up on that from reading just that little bit of Artemis. This is gonna be a series.
Oh, definitely.
Which, oh my God. Just recently, I finally got 2 chapters of Poseidon posted on Inkitt. They're under my subscription tier.
Really?
But Poseidon now has 2 chapters in, and I'm drafting chapter 3. So I'm
awesome.
Yeah. And Summer, the sequel to Spring, the manuscript is up because I originally had Summer and Autumn written, both in 2020.
Yeah.
Because, I was my surgery that I had in 2020. I was recovering and they wouldn't let me come back to work. So I wrote Summer in 7 weeks, front to start.
2020, that year was writer's paradise for a lot of us. Oh. We got a lot of stuff done. Oh my gosh. I got my first book done. Kim was also working on her stuff. Almost all of our original crew were busy during that focal point. And it's so cool to see how much we've all grown in these last few years. So for those that aren't aware of your second book, can you give us a little teaser into what they can expect in your second book?
Well, Nature Calls is the story of 2 teenage girls. One that's feeling really disconnected in the world, and the other one who's from another world trying to reach out. And it's how their friendship starts out, and they're trying to see if nature and humanity can coexist, or if they're designed to destroy each other.
Ooh, I'm not gonna lie. That sounds very similar to a book I read, Seasons of Avalon. Very, very kind of the same things, like if nature and humanity can live together, or can you just cause each other's destruction. That's actually really fascinating. So, sort of walk us through the process. Like, how did you come up with like the whole plot? Like, from Artemis to nature, what was the writer's journey to that point?
Well, like I said, when I was 16, I had these 3 sagas that just popped up in my head. Eclipse was the first one, which honestly, in April, that one will officially be turning 20 years old. And then I'll have Nature Calls. I wrote that summer because my parents were starting their divorce. They just told us that they were divorcing, and my whole world got thrown into a tailspin. And I was feeling really disconnected, and I didn't know who I could even trust. So I just, one day I'm sitting outside in my mom's friend's truck. We're out in the bed and it just starts raining.
Wow.
And I'm just so upset that I'm looking up at the sky, and I'm like, don't cry. It's gonna be okay. It's okay, Rain. It's okay. And my mom's friend's daughter looks at me and goes, "Are you talking to the rain?" And I was like, first of all, he has feelings. And I was being snarky, but I genuinely, this character started coming alive in my head. And I was like, well, what if I could reach out and talk, like find some solace in nature? Because I was in a completely new neighborhood. I didn't even feel safe there.
Right.
But there were trees. So I would sit under the trees and kind of decompress just to get out of my mom's house, get out of my sister's hair, and just recenter myself. And I felt so comfortable under trees. And this
okay.
yeah, this whole thing evolved into how, trees evolve and how their year goes. Because, they start out the winter thaw, they start budding with leaves, and then summer they have their fruits come in. In autumn, the leaves are falling off, and the fruit is rotting, and it's kind of unsettling kind of to look at. But at the end of the day, they're really just preparing for the big sleep, and then that starts a new cycle. And that was reminding me that, things pass. You just gotta stay the course. Yes, it's turbulent. Yes, this is uncomfortable. It's a little unsettling, but if you just keep going, it's gonna be okay.
Awesome.
And so by the time I finally get to my sophomore year of high school, then we have the unfortunate inciting incident that started Dodecatheon, and that was I got assaulted at my front doorstep.
Oh no.
Yes, and I was so angry that I wrote the prologue to Artemis, which you have read.
Yes, I remember that. I remember that was not gonna lie, that actually made my skin crawl. And I remember when I first had you on the show, you talked about that, and I remember I was thinking like, wow, that, because it was very, very real. And for listeners and viewers, if you have not read the prologue of Artemis, I encourage you all to read it, because it really sets the tone of what kind of world Artemis is living in. It is unapologetic, it's up in your face, and it kind of has to be, because for a topic such as that, you can't sugarcoat it. Now, there are many different ways that you can approach it, and I definitely think maybe, Jane, you could probably add some line to this. Writing that prologue, because it was very personal to you, and it's that raw kind of emotional experience. How do you kind of like balance it where you wanted the situation to be authentic, but at the same time you yourself do not want to have to relive that trauma?
Well, fortunately, that scene that you read is almost exactly the way I wrote it. I just ended up fleshing out, ironically, a comment on Inkitt said, "Wow, your king is weak." And I went, oh, okay, so I need to explain why he's unsettled and what's going on here. So Inkitt was where I got that bit with Chryseis and Zeus the Fae.
Yes.
That fleshed out on Inkitt. But everything else, pretty much aside from some proofreading,
Yes.
was written. I'm 16 years old.
Wow.
So fortunately, I don't really relive what happened because I got it out at that time. But
Right.
having written Artemis and going through what she's going through, because I put that poor girl through the ringer. She is on an arc of healing and reclaiming her own sense of personal control and power. It's a bumpy road, and like you said, you can't sugarcoat this. When you have a loss of control, it can make you do some very dangerous things, some very unsafe things. And she gets reckless, and especially when you have the goddess Artemis is technically your soul, like it doesn't help.
Yeah, definitely. And looking back at Artemis and also reading stories like what is it? I have them right here, The Last Lumenian, and another book that also talked about like trauma. And I was thinking like, wow, these are really, really good. And like Artemis's saga, as you've said, like you said, you put her through like hell. And then I look back at The Last Lumenian, another book that I read, and I was like, damn, writers and authors just really love to torment their characters. But depending on like what the world is, it's just like you want them to go through like a journey, but depending on the story, you may have to be like broken and like kind of like destroyed. But the beautiful thing about being an author, you get to make sure your character gets to have the happy. You get to make sure that they have the arc where they get to go, as I like to say, God mode or beast mode, where they just wreck house, and that they're not going to be the doormat. They're not going to be powerless. They're going to reclaim their power, reclaim their agency. And ultimately, I actually reread the first few chapters again of Artemis just because I love the story, and especially the interactions, those early interactions. You remember in the first interview we talked about where I think Artemis, what am I blanking on his name? But she meets somebody at a church, and I remember that interaction. And I was
David.
like, yeah.
Father David Fallon.
Yes, that's his name.
Buddy, I did not expect David to blow up the way he has. Like somebody told me like back when Artemis first came out, it's like, I think you just made the next Samwise Gamgee. And I went, no. Do not put that on me. Do not put that on me. And they're like, no, Camp David for the win. And that is what they call themselves. They are Camp David.
Camp David.
They all are like, I want a David in my life. I need David. I need him to be my life coach. And I'm like, okay. Watching my chat in the official Dodecatheon fan site on Facebook, they make memes all the time about like if anybody says something like bad about David, then they rage. It's hilarious. I got one meme where they were like that one meme where it's like the two tables and you have the line all going to one table and then this one dude just sitting there. They added trash bags and Oster the Grouch in front of the lonely one. And I'm like,
oh my gosh.
It ain't that serious. He's a support character, but oh my god. And there's like one person who doesn't like him. And I'm like, oh thank God I'm not insane. I didn't write a Larry Sue.
Oh man. But you always have those characters in stories that they just take the show. You have the main character, which is supposed to be the protagonist, but then you have the side character, which people love more. And I think that's a beautiful thing when it comes to writing, that you unintentionally make characters that people enjoy. So I guess kind of like my next set of questions, which are kind of clumped together, which is from Artemis to Nature, what has been like the overall feedback of both now looking back. Has your original promise, been validated by your readers and your listeners too? Because how can I forget that you also have your podcast where you also read your stories as well. So I couldn't forget about that. So has it been like validated these past like 2 years now with both books out now?
So I remember when I first wrote, like when I was writing Nature Calls and Artemis, what I was trying to do was I was taking a character that is hurting, is broken, is has been crushed by something, and I wanted readers to, like, when you're in somebody's like, to be in somebody's shoes that you actually can really connect with, because you're like, how many of us have been disappointed, have been crushed, have had disappointments that shook us to our core, and we kind of just want something to pick us back up. And in the case of the Dodecatheon saga, Artemis met David, and David is just this beacon of hope to her, and she finds him suspicious. Like, she's like,
Right.
no, like, no, I can't possibly, no, you're too good to be real. You're after something. And she just can't accept that maybe he just wants to be a nice person to her. In the case of Nature Calls, again, it follows this Jamie, who struggles with crippling depression. She also has it's a complex that I found. It's called the Medusa complex, which is something that children who like when they would get yelled at a lot as children, they develop this complex where they get frozen, like, fight, flight, or freeze.
Right.
Yes, they have developed the instinct of when people lash out at them, they just clam up and then either explode or implode. And Jamie has this, and so she struggles with communicating sometimes in tight, tense situations, but she has friends that have had her back. They always are looking out for her, and she's kind of like, she feels like a burden to them.
Oh, okay.
So she's like, I love that they love me, but she wants to be better. And then she meets Flora, Flora is the daughter of Mother Nature.
Oh, okay.
So you have this inhuman being that comes up to her and goes, I'm fascinated with you. And she's like, why? But at the same time, yay. Why is it easier to talk to somebody not human? Like, that escapism kind of a thing. So I was hoping that readers would be able to see something, like, take something from these characters and be like, look inside themselves and realize, hey, yeah, you're going through some stuff, but here, maybe these words will reach you. Maybe this is something you need to hear too. And whether a side character clicks with you too, like, these characters leave breadcrumbs throughout the story. So you never know who's going to reach out to you and help you through something. And I have read in reviews, heck, I didn't expect Artemis to get the reviews of, wow, it really makes you look at how, like, a difference in racism. Like, it really flips the script here. Like, what is really the core of this? And I'm like, well, I was just trying to help people understand that aren't we all human? Like, can we take this part of the equation and just be like, hey, can we just sit down and have a conversation? And maybe we can get down to what's really, really going on here, and maybe not necessarily ignore prejudices, but realize that they are subjective.
Right.
And which is why the conversation that happens between this human girl and one of the Zeni resistance fighters, like, that conversation has actually, a lot of people have asked me about. They're like, well, what really fueled that? And I was like, well, the fact that I'm an omniist, and I am like, hey, faith makes you better. It should never draw lines in the sand.
Right.
And I wanted that to be shown. Same in Nature Calls too. Like, I have a lot of alternative, like, faiths in there, but they all get along. Like, one of the kids' parents, they're from Norway, and they're very much still into their pagan Norse hedonistic faith. And then you've got Jamie's aunt, who's like a neo-pagan witch. And they're like, let's talk about our cauldrons. Let's what we cooking in the cauldron today. But then you have one of the other girls' moms is a Christian. and yet they all sit together and they can enjoy like hanging out with each other and have their girl day of the week when the men aren't home. Like they all get along, showing like bringing community together. Like that was the whole, like I want to bring people together, and I am seeing a lot of conversations of like, wow, like this made me feel connected. Like I think there was a reviewer who said that I've never felt more connected to the universe than after reading this book.
Wow, that's quite a thing.
And I'm like, well, I mean, I was influenced by, a lot of older philosophies when I was working on it. But that's kind of like, what are our roots? That's Nature Calls thing, is what are our roots? Finding our roots again. Dodecatheon is, why are we so separated? And I'm already seeing people telling me that they like feeling connected.
That's actually really powerful. And I like that as I've grown older now, with like reading these new types of stories, for a long time when I was younger, I wasn't necessarily into like a lot of the social commentary in stories and fiction. But as I've grown older, I like stories like that because it is fascinating, because it makes that connection with the reader and with real life, where it's like, yes, it kind of reflects our own reality, but it is not our own reality. It's just basing it off, like Star Wars. I've always said that Star Wars is a reflection of reality of Earth, but it's not Earth. Some things are similar, some things are different, but it's there to make that connection and to make the commentaries. And I'm actually glad that you've actually brought up that a lot of people are making those connections with Artemis Nature Calls, because it is really fascinating when stories can do that, right? And I'm sure you can agree, Jaden, that as a reader as well, you may have read other books that have probably talked on the similar topic, of maybe the same commentary, the same topic, or maybe something different, but they always don't. Sometimes it's a 50-50 like nail on the head. So how would you say you nail the commentary where you're not preaching, but it's somewhere that the reader can absorb on their own? Because I'm sure you would agree that you would not want a book, depending on the book type, to be preaching a message to you flat outright like a movie.
Yeah, this actually is a huge thing that I actually try to speak to when I talk to other authors, is that one of the ways that I approach this is that every character's motives matter. You have to treat the character's motivations, who they are at their core, as just as valid as everyone else's. So even if they have if it's a side character, you have to know, who is this person and why do they feel the way they do. But that also goes into world building and things like that. But you have to acknowledge that everybody's choices are their choices. And that, yes, it's complicated. Backstory can be complicated. Yes. Complicated is not good or bad necessarily. Because remember, what is history but just the perspective of the victor?
That is true.
So when you think about how complex your history and your world building goes into things, like my villains, when I write a villain, I don't write them like twirly mustache. I go, what made this person think that this was okay? Or why does this person cling so tightly to this thing that should obviously be considered inhumane?
Right.
Or maybe this person's faith is all they have, and why? Like, you have to really think about who this character is, because when you write them, that's how their conviction comes across. Because if this character doesn't come across as convicted, like they have a conviction and rooted reason for how they feel the way they feel, then you can't, one, have a decent debate between the characters.
Right.
But you also can present perspectives versus a message. Because every character, just like with people, they have a perspective and a way and a history and a life that they've come from that made them who they are. Now, does that mean that they can change that down the road? Absolutely. Because the core reason we have conflict, and I believe this as somebody who has studied storytelling and how it relates to humanity, conflict is how we learn. It's not just a matter of like, oh, butting heads. No, conflict is just two different perspectives meeting. And how does that go? Like,
Right.
do you effectively convey your perspective, or do you not effectively convey your perspective? So I think that having ineffective can be good conflict because that's what can lead to a fight.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have effective communication, when you have effective conflict and it comes to a resolution, that's where you can have really good dialogue about a topic that means something to you as the author that you want the reader to have. Like in the case of Dodecatheon, this human girl has been raised in a kind of Protestant faith, like that she's really coming into her own because Father Fallon had the whole congregation going, hey, how do you actually feel about this faith? Like, I'm not going to have you sit in these pews and just accept it. I want you to think about it. Ask me questions.
Right.
Why should you really feel this convicted by it? And when she did that, he let her have a Bible. And he's like, read it for yourself. Find out what it says. Don't just take what I said at face value. Really take it into your heart. And when she's faced with somebody who genuinely thinks that Catholicism is the worst thing that ever happened to the planet, she goes, why do you feel that way? And he's like, because you called me an abomination. And she's like, I didn't call you an abomination. I don't think you're an abomination. Who called you an abomination? Because there's nothing like that. The Bible doesn't say that. So who told you that? And it completely debunks the whole fight because he's over here like, their whole resistance thinks that all Catholics think that they're unholy.
Right.
And he goes, okay, I'll bite. So then what does it say? And she's like, well, God says that he made everything and it's sacred because he made life. So you're biracial. That's what you are. And he's like, huh? I've never heard that word. And she's like, well, that's what you are. You're Greco and human. And he's like, huh? So just like the whole thing just fizzled out. And now you're like, what are we really fighting about? We don't have a reason to fight.
No.
What are we really fighting over? They're fighting for survival and they don't know who they can trust.
And they've been told that they're the enemy, but like, well, are you though? I mean, and I think you would also agree. I'm sorry to cut you off because I was so in tune with everything because it reminds me of like when I was writing Michael. There's this I didn't put in the dialogue, but I'm saving it, and it's actually where Lucifer and Lilith are, raging together. And when I was writing that part of where they're like together, one person did say, you made Lucifer almost like the Lucifer of, the Netflix show. And it's like, well, he kind of is the same way, but he's not really that charming. Like, he's still like, he's a villain, but he knows what he's done. He pretty much like honors it, but he made a commitment saying that I'm going to marry this woman. Yes, she's a demon, but I love her. I think that what we can do together is a huge thing. And yeah, and in the book, Michael, it's hinted that the war of the Angel Civil War happens to a new front. It's because he marries the mother of all demons and has a half angel, half demon child. And throughout this whole story, that one section, everyone was saying, well, how are you going to depict them? Well, they're not going to be what everyone thinks they are. They're going to be how they view themselves. They're going to look elegant. They're going to look regal. I'm not going to write them in the way that people would say they are, because to them, which I'm sure you would agree, a villain doesn't see themselves as the villain in their own story. They view themselves as this troubled, conflicted individual who's committed to this path, who genuinely believes this is the right thing to do. And that's what going back to what you said, that is where good conflict stems from. When you have two very, very well thought out ideologies, and as the author, you can create that dialogue to where you can have those discussions. And another one, which is between Hannibal, half-elf, and Barjan, they're both classified as Nephilims, but the difference is the term. Nephilim can refer to an angel that has lost his trust or faith in heaven or in God, or in other tellings, half angel, half whatever. And so it's like, I'm not a Nephilim. It's like, well, you are in this sense. Yes, I'm half angel, half something else, but I'm also classified as a Nephilim. And that discussion, which is so fascinating, and I think that leads to another question: is in the reviews you've gotten from Nature Calls and Artemis, is there one review that really sticks out that you really hold dear to, in a sense that it's like an emotional like response, or like it really touches you as an author and an individual?
I do remember a particular it was an Inkitt review, actually. Of course it's pre-published, but they had talked about how I had found a way to bring worlds that shouldn't work together.
Okay.
And like it mentions like Greek and Roman, because remember I have the Greek pantheon and I also have the Roman pantheon that
Right.
are together, and that's its own plot line. But you also have the world of Catholicism, and you've got a fully fleshed out Vatican. You have the Greco state, which they've established themselves back in their pagan, ways and things like that. And yet all of this is somehow coexisting. And how does this work? Like, she was like, this shouldn't work, but it does. And she's like, why does this feel like it makes more sense? And I was like, oh, wow. Like,
isn't that the $1 million question?
I mean, I know why I wrote it the way I did, was because I've always had this mindset that the only thing standing in the way of utopia is personal bias. So if you can objectively, and this goes back into like leadership and things like that, if you can objectively go, look, we all share this planet, we all have to figure out how to not fight each other, we're going to set down some ground rules. Are these ground rules okay with you? Do you have anything to add? And they go objectively adding to what they have to say. We kind of can have some kind of, stable homeostasis, right?
Right.
So of course you're still going to have headbutting, but usually that happens when someone violates the ground rules, right?
Mm-hmm. That is true.
So I'm like, the fact that I actually made a meme in our chat where it's like the African kid staring at the relief worker like suspicious, and he goes, Zeus the Third stirs up trouble for no reason when everything was completely chill, and then Zeus the Fifth asking the advisor what drugs was he on.
Oh man,
like literally like, why
did you start this?
Everything was chill. We were kind of getting a normalcy here. And then Zeus the Third suddenly decides that humans are basically rodents and that any children made with them should be like sterile. Like, God, no. And we're like, why?
It's like,
why?
It's always interesting because, yeah, that actually reminds me of another story where it's kind of along the same lines as those ground rules, where it's like you have certain characters, when it's like a piece for so long, you have like this stagnation. And as like sort of like history goes, if there's a stagnant period, something's got to change, either something good, or in some cases in history, it's something much worse. And that's when we have new stories, new strands of history arising. And that actually leads to another story that I read, which is called The Last Angel and the Council of Three. The Council of Three is like a story written by another author who kind of says, the angels had a fight, a civil war, and you have the pixies, which are humans that have angel powers, but they're not considered Nephilims. Nephilims are those that are half angel, half pixies, or half pixies, half humans. So now you have the pixies that are ruling their own kingdoms, But then you also have the angels, which rule over the humans to kind of keep the balance. And then you have the Council of the Three, which are known as the Kingmakers, because they establish the different kings of this one kingdom, which is ruled by an angel. But the problem is, this one angel is dying of old age. He's given up his immortality. And you also have another issue where you don't have the devil in this world, but he's called by a different name, but he is the father of all monsters. And there's one area in the desert that is completely charred, and everyone's wondering what's gonna happen. Like, they know that battle's gonna come again, but then you have the three different powers. You have the humans, you have the pixies, and you have the angels. And the angels have technology. They have walkers that can shoot down pixies by the thousands. And I'm like, why did you start the war? You were fine. And I remember reading it, and it goes back to this thing is that some angels were not fond of humans having their own wings. Like the Nephilim are completely separate. They're like their own communities, but the pixies are kind of powerful. But the thing is, there's a lot of pixies and not a lot of angels. So you can definitely see the power shifting to the pixies' favor. And it's just so fascinating, like what you can do with storytelling and world building. It is. And it kind of leads into another question. Yes, fantasy is the best. And it kind of leads into the next question, which is, as I'm sure you can probably agree, when writing these kind of complex stories, it is like a very lonely process. You commit everything to this story. You sacrifice hours. And sometimes you write the story, and of course, it's a draft. It's going to go through changes. But then when you finally finish it, you finally put it out to the world, you always have that voice in the back of your head, because I've always had it. It's like, are people really going to enjoy this? So I guess looking back, Jaden, for you, what still motivates you to write, to still push through and say, you know what? I don't care what anyone says. These are the stories that I'm writing. I'm writing these stories for this reason. What pushes you?
Okay, well, gonna dig a little deeper on this one. And this is sometimes where I struggle connecting with some other authors out there when we try to network.
Right.
I actually feel compelled to tell stories that come to me. I've never been able to be like, let me write a story for trope's sake, or I want to find a trend and follow the trend. No, these stories have literally come to me, and they're very vivid. They're very strong, and they almost feel like they came to me alive, or these are stories that haven't been told yet. And my dad always told me that my hands were meant to be used for something bigger than myself. And ironically, one of my dumb things in college, we went to a fortune teller, and she said the exact same thing. And I was like, okay. And then, ironically, the backer that actually gave me the money to publish Artemis, she told me that I am basically a modern day epic poet, like the people who wrote myths. She's like, we need more authors like you who write like deeply convicted stories, but also they're on an epic scale. Like, we need this kind of thing again. And that's why she wanted Artemis. I'm over here like, I don't know that the world's ready for Artemis. And she's like, I don't give a damn. We're going to do it. Like, she wanted me to get a video game done, and I started drafting out a script for a video game. But it ended up, we didn't end up going forward with it because she didn't want me to go with Sony. So, like, I'm still sitting on that. I don't know what I'm doing with it, but I feel like when a story comes to me and I start writing it, it's for somebody I don't know. There's somebody out there that either needs to read this or a lot of people that need to read it. In the case of Nature Calls, I know I've had a couple teenagers that read it on Inkitt that were like, I want Flora to be my friend. And I went, sweet summer child. Oh my God. Okay. Like there's a lot of disconnectedness that I felt for Nature Calls in particular was supposed to bring people together, especially young people. That's why the characters are 16.
Right.
But in the case of like Nature Calls and some of my other ones, it's how we live in a world that should be more connected than ever. And if anything, one of the oldest forms of like magic is storytelling.
Right.
And I think that storytelling is my magic.
Awesome.
And I'm putting out my intentions that I hope for, my hopes, my intentions, my desires that I want for the world into these things. And that might be why they come across so strongly. Because I know there are people who love Artemis. They're like, that's my girl. You better not put her through for too much more. And I went, well, it's a 12-book series, so buckle up.
Nice. Man, oh man. Well, we've reached the end of this interview, Jaden, but before we officially end it, what is your brief word of wisdom to new authors who want to, stretch their wings and go into this field? And where can people find and engage with you to know more about Artemis, Nature Calls, and your other social media handles?
Well, I always give a blessing to anybody who reads what I read, and that's always be blessed, and be kind to yourself and others as we all walk the journey of life. We're just taking different vehicles. We're all going in the same direction though, and we're all going to get there eventually.
Right.
But as for other authors, other bards out there like ourselves that are trying to get into this, one is being a writer takes bravery.
Yes.
It takes courage, but that doesn't mean that you're fearless. You just said you're terrified no one's gonna like this story. Yes. Every story I write, I'm like, I don't know who the target audience is. I don't know who's meant to read this. I'm just gonna put this out there and hope somebody likes it. And then 5-star, 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 4-star, 4.5, 4. Like, you gotta be brave enough to be vulnerable, to put out words that are inside you. You're the only one who can tell this story.
Right.
So write it like no one will ever see it first.
100%
the first draft
agree.
is going to be messy. It's going to be a hot mess. Don't fix it. Let it be the problem crazy toddler that every parent has to deal with. And then once you finish it, then go back and groom, clean it up. And then you can go, oh God, yeah, that's unnecessary. Or, ooh, I could tweak that. Like, you got to be vulnerable before you can have J.K. Rowling.
Right.
Before you can have C.S. Lewis, J.R. Tolkien, before you can be Neil Gaiman. They all have rough drafts.
Yes.
And you're a rough draft too. So you're going to go through as many changes as your book. Be open to it. That's my advice for authors. And then as far as if you want to find me, my brand is Imaginings by Jay, or the Imaginings Universe, which is where I have my demiurge solar dragon with all of his worlds orbiting around his sun, because I am an introvert. Nice. You can find me I'm Imaginings by Jay on most of my handles. J. Alleyn Winchester as well. You can find me on either one. I'm recently trying to get TikTok moving. I have no idea what to do with this handle. I'm trying to figure it out. But the one thing that I usually do push is my Inkitt, because that wall is easier for me to post on. Most of the stuff I post on my socials just comes from the wall.
Right.
And I'm J. Alleyn Winchester on Inkitt. I do have my subscription tier where you can read sequels. Poseidon's is being written in real time there. And the full draft, the full manuscript of Summer is there. And I am in need of alpha and beta readers to come into that. So if you want to jump on that one, you can look up my tier over there. And then my Hearth of a Writer podcast is where I read a chapter from one of my books every Sunday. And I posted up there. We just wrapped up Artemis at the beginning of this month, and I am now in spring. So the first chapter of every book is free to read, and then everything else is a subscription tier. My friend, who doesn't like David, ironically, has agreed to do what we call author roast because she is on the spectrum. So she lets her thoughts run out of her mouth, and they're hilarious. So I let her roast my book in real time, and I record it.
Oh my gosh.
And they're fun. My wife got in on it because she's like, we need another side. We need another side to this before you start recording. So my wife, you can hear my wife, Kitty, my kitty princess over there. My friend Robin is in on it. And then her daughter has started coming in, and now her daughter is invested in Artemis. So we just are all having fun commentary about, wait, what does that mean? Where did this come from? And then at random, you'll have things like, what continent are we on?
Right.
So
awesome.
Those are all free. So I do have free things that you can enjoy on the podcast. I'm trying to come up with some new stuff because I do realize that I only have 2 published books, and I want to make some more content to make people interested in subscribing. But yeah, it's $4.99 a month. You get an audiobook experience, and you get to listen to some shenanigans on Spotify. So
nice. Well, I'll be listing all those down below. And also, if you want to purchase copies of Artemis, I'll also be linking that down below so you can purchase it. I urge you all to go and check it out and leave reviews because I've always said reviews help authors like us grow. We put all of our money into editing, getting the covers. All we need is just a review. And with that,
$5,000.
Yes.
$5,000 went into both of those books. Each.
I know the feeling. I probably went to 1,000 for mine, and honestly, it's still worth it in the end. And listeners, I also urge you all to go follow Jaden, my dear friend. He's an incredible author, a great human being. And again, Jaden, thank you so much for being on the show. It's great to see you again. And let's make this a
oh dear, where did you go? Oh dear.
signing out. And